Now shed season is upon us. And with that, it brings a really good set of strategies of exactly when should you go shed hunting on your land or the land that you hunt on. Now most of us, I hunt on small properties. I hunt on properties that are around 40 acres in size here in Southwest Wisconsin. I visit clients around the country to design their properties. Half of my clients are 60 acres or less. And so a lot of us out there hunt on very small properties, and I think there's a strategy that goes along if you're hunting on small properties, and that strategy is very important. We'll circle back to that at the end of this video. So if most of you are hunting small properties, then I think there's a strategy for you. Now if you're in some northern regions, everyone talks about we got to get those sheds, we got to go run out and get those sheds. If you're out in northern areas, and if you think about this out west, and with elk and mule deer, there's actually ranges where you're not allowed to shed hunt until after a certain day, because when you're going into those deer yards, those elk regions, those elk wintering areas, mule deer, you can actually put a lot of stress on those animals when you're shed hunting by removing them from their wintering habitats and moving them around. You're really burning energy that they've conserved for the end of the winter and to carry them through the winter. They've even rerouted snowmobile trails in Minnesota, and this is going back decades, because they found that those snowmobiles going through the deer yarding areas and wintering areas took energy away from those whitetails, which ultimately took days that they could survive a prolonged winter at the end of the winter. So very important to think about these northern areas, and let's face it, a lot of these northern areas, when I lived up in the UP of Michigan, now I'm down in Southwest Wisconsin, then in the UP of Michigan, a lot of those antlers were dropping in the end of December and early January. And so that temptation was to go down in that favorite deer yard in early January, especially if there's heavy snow in late November and December, and those deer were pushed 10 to 20 miles into those wintering areas full of cedar, basically green barns that they could withstand, and they had thermal cover with snow hindrance cover. The temptation was to go down those yards and just start scavenging for sheds. Well, then you're pushing those deer all around. You're exposing them to a higher rate of predation, cars, and burning a lot of energy. So think about that in some of those northern regions. What I like to do is, a lot of times there's so much snow in those northern areas, those sheds are going to wait. They're going to be there. The squirrels aren't going to necessarily dig them up. And so wait for that snow to melt, and then you're really hitting that hard the end of March, early April. Now, if you're on public land, a little bit different story, and I think you can even mix this in with large parcels. So I've heard someone with a large parcel, they said, you got to get out there and find those sheds. Squirrels are going to get to them. Well, that's fine if you have large parcels or if you're searching on public land, because someone else might find them. Maybe the squirrels will get them. But you can afford, if you push those deer around, that you can come back, that you can find those sheds anyways. They might drop them a quarter mile away, half mile away, but it's a big public land parcel, or it's a big privately owned parcel, and you could basically shed hunt every day and you're looking for those sheds. I still like to find deer herds that are set, that are quiet, that aren't moving much, that aren't expending a lot of energy. Areas that you know that you can go into this bench with a bunch of hemlocks on it down by a stream, where deer traditionally winter on a large private parcel or big open vast public land hardwood setting, where you know they're at, maybe clear cuts, and you wait till that perfect timing for your area, and then you go in for shed hunting. Now, the perfect timing. Traditionally, northern, big woods, lack of high quality food, sheds are going to drop closer towards the first of the year. And when you get into high quality ag land, I would say the majority of the deer right now, it's February 22nd. And from client feedback, my own personal observations, we find that approximately 70, 60%, 80% of the bucks are holding both antlers in prime ag, Midwest traditional big buck hunting areas. That window can be great. You'll find deer that are bucks that are more stressed. They're dropping early in January. But by the time you get to March 1st, I find traditionally that at least half of those antlers have dropped, and maybe even more, 60%, 70%. By the time you get to the end of March, 80 to 90% have dropped. We still see a few bucks holding into April. That's not uncommon. I think last year our latest picture of a decent sized buck, I think it was a 3-year-old, was on March 29th. So big window where you have high quality ag, big window. I like waiting, especially if you're on a small property, until about March 1st, early March, because then you can count on a large percent of the sheds have actually dropped. And what's great about that is you're not pushing the deer off, especially on small parcels, to neighboring lands or pushing them far few between, where you're not concentrating those deer on the 5 favorite places to find sheds. We'll just go over those real quickly. It'd be bedding areas, feeding areas, thick brushy travel corridors in between, crossings like fence crossings, ditch crossings, and then finally actually in winter habitat. When you're pushing deer out of winter habitat on these small parcels or anywhere, they could drop those sheds all across a huge amount of habitat, a lot harder to find. So if you're allowing those deer to concentrate, whether they're northern deer, big woods deer, and they're dropping early, traditionally closer to January with those poor food sources or marginal food sources, then you're waiting for those deer to inhabit those winter areas, and you're not going in until later when that snow's melted, and then you can easy pickings a lot of times because you're not moving around. Certainly on small parcels, even though some might drop early, and let's face it, every year it's an early shed drop year, right? That's what you hear on social media. That's what you see online, that every year is earlier, every year it seems like, but it's just that more people are hyped up every single year. And so waiting, a lot of patience, whether you're pushing deer around in traditional wintering areas that need to conserve energy, or you just simply want to have a better chance of finding sheds on your own land. Often patience is the key. In these big traditional ag areas, maybe wait more towards March, where a high percentage of antlers are actually falling. Think about those timing tips as it relates to conservation of energy for deer, pushing deer off onto your neighbors, maybe even snow melt. And I think that by expressing a little patience, unless you feel you need to run out there and beat someone to the punch on public land, patience is always best in most things, and certainly with shed hunting. And we're out here in the winter wonderland today. We're looking for some sheds. We're checking some trail cameras mostly, hoping not to push too many deer around. And when this melts, hopefully someday, then we'll find a good amount of sheds out here because we're practicing a little bit of patience.